Well, so here's the question I have, because I love the concept. It's a very cool show, the way it comes together.
Thank you.
And I think the thing that's interesting, though, is people think 3 minutes, three things, like, oh, that's such an easy show to put together. But I think what's actually happened is and you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like outside looking in, it looks like your show actually takes a bit more work than some hour podcasts to put together, because you're really trying to make sure that like you get the right stuff, you don't waste people's time. I'm curious for you, like, what does that process look like in actually creating a show that's, three things in 3 minutes?
Sure. I'm happy to share that. So it starts out with, when I talk to marketers, I always ask them what are their superpowers. And it's just what you naturally do. And my superpower, which I've made a business out of, is making the complex simple. Or as a client told me one time, Drew, you make the obscure obvious.
The world could use a lot more of that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, yesterday was the presidential debate, and I just posted something about, here's my 6 observations from the debate. And, you can decide whether or not you agree with them or not, but I've already gotten feedback. It's like, that was very concise. That makes a lot of sense. And that's what I try to do, is help people make sense of their world. So with my podcast, I require a 30-minute pre-planning session. And I had one person push back on me and say, you mean it's a 3-minute podcast? What do we need 30 minutes for? And it's like, exactly.
Well, I'll add a caveat to that, though, Drew, because I think there's a lot of people, and this is why your show is different. I think a lot of people use a pre-call to be lazy. Does that make sense? Whereas you use it because you're actually building a show. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yep. Because our we have a brand promise. One, it's 3 insights in about 3 minutes. That means we will never, ever go over 3 minutes and 59 seconds. That is a brand promise. So in order to do that, we have to be well planned out. So I use this 30-minute session. I'm very good at, and I took you through this process, Jeremy. Yes. What's unique about you? What's interesting? How can I leverage this? What has my market not heard? And how can I piece this together? So ultimately, in the process of our discussion with each other, I came up with, here's 3 interesting nuggets that Jeremy talked about. So
how many iterations did it take you to get to that? Like you, because you mentioned like you really have it down of like, these are the things I need to ask. But I imagine like maybe there were different iterations that got you to that. Does that make sense?
I've done this often enough now that I know at the end of the podcast pretty clearly, here's the 3 insights. And this is just I'm sorry, I said podcast, during the pre-planning. During that 30 minutes, I'm pretty sure about, here are the 3 insights. Sometimes people might have 4 or 5 that I want to leverage, but I only pick 3. And we usually dive into one and we find out there's like one really good point actually has 3 legs, and there's 3 insights there. So that's the pre-planning. But at the end of that session, I know what I'm going to want the guest to say because they've already told me it. So then the work I do after that is I write up an outline of the 3 questions that I'm going to ask that set up those insightful bullet points. So I end up writing an outline. Here's the question I'm going to ask. Jeremy, here's what you told me about that kind of question. Here's the bullet points. Don't read them. Just tell me about them. But I'm going to ask you this question. And sometimes that bullet point, like the last bullet point to the first answer, sets up the next question. And so that's a bit of the orchestrating and scripting that I rely on from my video production career. But after I've done the 30-minute interview, it takes me 15 minutes to whip that up. But I have the background to do that. And I've been doing this now for 4 seasons. So I know what makes for a good podcast. So then I send that outline to my guest and say, hey, do I got this right? Does this sound good? Do you want to change anything? Do I have your description as a business correct? We get all that. I also send them the link for scheduling. the podcast. So then we do that. They give me some feedback. They rarely change anything. They're very excited about it. And oftentimes I get this kind of feedback. Wow, you're going to make me look really good.